5 years from now, is NVIDIA still the biggest name in AI hardware? Aaron Botman is an IBM fellow and master inventor. Welcome back to the show, Aaron. What do you think?
So I do think that they're going to be in the top five. The field's going to be much more fragmented with different chip architectures, but I'm looking forward to see what types of neuromorphic chips are going to come out.
Wagner Santana is a staff research scientist, master inventor on the Responsible Tech team. Wagner, welcome back. Your predictions, please.
I second Aaron. I think that NVIDIA will be still at the top, but with different architectures and maybe cooler ideas on new architectures for chips.
Yeah, I hope so. Shobit Varshney, Senior Partner Consulting on AI for US, Canada, and Latin America. Shobit, tell us what you think.
I think NVIDIA, in terms of AI systems, beyond just the chip, there's a lot that goes around it. I think it'll be a force to reckon with for the next 5 years. And I would say this should be the top 2 or 3.
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Huang, and welcome to Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOEE brings you the analysis, hot takes, and banter that you need to keep up with the ever-hectic world of artificial intelligence. We've got another packed schedule for today's episode. We're going to talk about a new jailbreak that's hitting the scene, people you can't talk about on ChatGPT. But first, we wanted to take as our top story the AWS reInvent conference, which is happening this week. So for those of you who may be less familiar, this is the annual conference for Amazon's AWS. And there's been a host of big announcements coming out of Amazon this week, not least of which is that they are announcing that their new generation of their sort of AI chip, what they call Trainium, Trainium 3 is going to be launching very, very soon. There's a lot to get into, but I think, Shobit, I wanted to kind of throw it to you first because you were actually at the conference. I just talked a little bit about Trainium, but curious if there's what are the trends that you're seeing? What are other big announcements our listeners should know about?
From my vantage point, AWS reInvent was the AI event of the year.
It's a pretty bold statement. I mean, there's been a lot of big AI events this year.
In terms of what they're trying to do to change the industry and absolutely dominate in the AI space is just absolutely incredible. If you look at all the different stacks or the layers of the stack, at the compute level, they are doing a lot in terms of the chips, and so are other competitors as well, but they are quite ahead. When you have somebody like Anthropic and you're building a supercomputer for them that's 5x more powerful than what Anthropic has today, that is making a bold statement. As a company, Amazon has to do a lot of AI, and they have a really good history of doing that for 10, 15 years. So they're building on top of that. The compute is going to be very critical for them. Nice ROI. Second on top, all the storage. The amount of options you get as a developer is just incredible. It's a dream for us to go build for our clients. It's one of our largest partners globally, AWS. So we do a lot of work in building large systems with all the different options with them. Then is the AI layer for all the models. I think across the board, they've been very clear on choices. If there's one word that summarizes AWS today, it's ecosystem. They're trying to do their best to make sure you have the best-in-class models available, the best-in-class apps, and things of that nature. But then, oh, by the way, we also have our own version that is delivering higher ROI. We are matching or exceeding. You have a massive announcement with NVIDIA, and oh, by the way, we have our own chips. We have great collaboration and investment in Anthropic and all these other models. By the way, we also have our own. So I think the choice is why people will come to AWS and reInvent the kind of announcements they have made. We spent the last 3 days hands-on working with the product leads. Being such a big partner of AWS, we get some dedicated talent from AWS to give us previews and give hands-on experiences on how this actually is working. They've done an incredibly good job. I'm so excited about the next few months going and doing this with our clients.
Yeah. Aaron, so do you buy the hype? I mean, should everybody else in the AI space be scared? Traditionally, right, most of the attention has been OpenAI and Anthropic and the people who are doing the models. I guess Shobit's kind of making the claim here that, it's maybe Amazon's going to kind of take the cake in the end, but I don't know if you buy that argument.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that it's sort of a quasi-contest to beat out NVIDIA, right, where they're trying to build their own chips to compete. However, if you looked at the announcement that AWS is still hedging, right, by partnering with NVIDIA, right, on P6, right? So even though they're building their own Trainium chips, they're still going to be working with them on P6, and because of that, they're looking to see which way the tide's going to go. And then I also view this as, AWS is looking to reduce their dependence on third-party chips to enhance their performance on AI workloads on AWS. But to me, right? There's still a lot of work that AWS has to do on the software stack, and they still have to prove out performance. If we think back, NVIDIA uses CUDA, right? That's the most widely adopted platform of AI workloads in the world, and it's supported by PyTorch and TensorFlow. Now, Trainium, it uses AWS's Neuron SDK, right, which has a fraction of the market share, and it's not as proven as CUDA. So, yes, I think that the chip hardware itself with Trainium is great, but AWS has work to do to build the consumer and developer trust, right, to be really, really competitive. And that's why I think AWS is hedging by still partnering with NVIDIA with P6.
Right. Yeah. It feels like we're kind of in this really interesting world where, I mean, all the big cloud providers are kind of working on their own chips right now. And they're also all working with NVIDIA. And I think it's kind of everybody's hedging a little bit. I guess, Wagner, maybe this goes to your prediction. You were saying kind of in the future, maybe we'll just have a more diversity of chips. And actually, that will be the really good thing. Do you have a prediction on kind of like how the market's going to divide, right? Like, will it be just like NVIDIA for pre-training or, these types of chips for inference? Or I'm just kind of curious about how you think that market's going to divide out.
I think that it will be based on business case. Thinking back when I was involved with digital agriculture, when you see places that you have no connectivity, and then you start thinking, okay, if we have to have like chips with inference running at the edge, then that will be the chip that will dominate the market. If you have, let's say, machinery for agriculture using those chips, and if you have access to data, if you are, let's say, in the next to the place where they gather information, then probably you have something for do the pre-training and training, and that will be, and then you have enough power connectivity in certain places in a huge farm. So I think that it will be based on business case and how connectivity and data arrives at these specific hotspots.
One of the really interesting comments was from Ben Thompson, who writes a newsletter called Stratechery. It's like very, very good. One of the ways he sort of framed up a lot of the announcements was Amazon's basically making the bet that models won't matter so much in the future, right? That essentially it'll be sort of like infrastructure that runs the day, and models will be like widely commodified. And so kind of like what we thought was so special, which is, oh my God, you have to get the latest model that's been released by OpenAI, is just going to be less of a thing in the future. Do you guys buy that? Like, do you feel like, what we're seeing now is a movement of momentum towards the infrastructure providers versus kind of like the model creators?
Tim, I think we are making really good progress as a community across each one of those. You do need better intelligent models for reasoning and things of that nature. We're making some incredible strides in that space. That'll continue. There's a lot that happens before and after an LLM call. AWS has done an incredible job with their SageMaker stack. All the kind of automatic reasoning checks, the kind of things around how do I go pull structured data as part of my LLM calls, enhancements to all kinds of things that we as developers need. When we go and build these for the clients in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of custom work in the middleware to make these LLMs work well. And now you're seeing each one of those providers catch up with giving you a full ecosystem end to end, because they're also learning from how enterprises are deploying these. So I think AWS as a community is further ahead than some of their peers, and giving you the full spectrum end to end and making it super easy for startups to come and go do this. I always have an enterprise mentality around these things. They're doing an incredible job on grounding, on making sure there's right governance, massive ecosystem. You can bring your own favorite eval to the framework and whatnot. They're very, very well placed. Models are going to get better. There's going to be a constant battle on that, but over time, it becomes a commodity.
That's for sure. So I guess, Shobhit, what's your prediction, I guess, for Amazon in the new year? Like you said, this is the biggest wave of announcements. Like where does it look like when we're at reInvent, 2025?
They have clearly made a very massive dent in the AI community in the last 2-3 days, right? If you roll back 2 years, 2022, when we were here, they had just made a bunch of AI announcements. And then 2 days later, we had ChatGPT come out. So they got caught off guard at their reInvent. Last year, reInvent was more around, yes, sure, I'm going to bring the big dogs on stage. I'll have Anthropic on during the keynote, NVIDIA and whatnot, right? So they said, yeah, we also have a lot of options. This one, they just came in just dominating this.
It took 24 months, but now they're killing it.
Now it's like, guys, we got this. So I think the overall messaging was, where else will you go to do secure, scalable, end-to-end, infinitely scale, like pluggable and ecosystem play in AI? Like, don't outsource it to an API call. Come build with us, and here's how simple it is. Just a very subtle cultural thing. There's every session, technical session I've gone to, they end with the same kind of enthusiasm. It says, it always ends with, what will you build next? Right? They have this huge emphasis in every session, right? They excite you about the possibility. They give you a couple examples of what clients are already doing, and they say, what are you going to build next? And the product managers are going to hang around. They'll show you how this has worked. Whenever I have a conversation at AWS with any of their folks, it typically starts with, hey, let me point you to a GitHub repo that does this for you, and then I'll show you this in action. But the first intention is, go build epic stuff with this, man. Go get up and go get started, and we'll have dedicated people to come help you go build. I think it's a very different take than it's black and white between AWS and Microsoft and others, right? You see a very different target audience. You see a lot more geeky conversations, hands-on tech, this stuff scales kind of conversation, and you can build epic things with this.
Yeah. Being able to build those epic things is really important because, I mean, the way I see it is that, with these new chain of thought algorithms where these models can begin to self-learn, is that, it's almost like we build these foundational models with pre-training, and then you have a choice. Do you want to fine-tune it? Do you want to do some instruct tuning, right? But then I've noticed that now there's this, instead of just really fast inference, there's this thinking phase now. Right. And this thinking phase, it can go on for minutes, even hours. Right. And because this thinking phase is happening with all these emergent behaviors and skills, you need this scalable, secure, robust architecture that I think, was announced at this conference. So it's real exciting, right, to be a part of this, right, and to watch what's happening.
That's great. Well, definitely to keep an eye on. There's going to be a lot more action in the space. And yeah, it is really exciting. I mean, I think that had you asked me 24 months ago, I would have been like, Amazon's way behind. They're never going to catch up, but you can never really count them out because they're Amazon. So,
Tim, this is one last thing I would add to this. Being the world's cloud provider, they have the largest market share. They see a lot of workloads. So they have an unfair advantage that others do not have. They can see how people are actually leveraging these tools. What are they building? How are they contributing back to the community? So they can go test out and be the second movers and just dominate after that, right? Because people build stuff. There's a lot of small startups that have built all these niche things that got announced as features within AWS, right? So you have this unfair advantage that AWS has because they see how people are actually using it in enterprises. Bringing in a large trusted partner, like one of the most trusted brands is Apple. Making a statement that Apple for the last decade has been building on AWS, that gets all the financial services clients, who one of them was sitting right next to me, got very excited saying that, oh, this is a really clear statement that you're doing trusted computing if you have Apple on stage talking about it, right? The massive financial services like JP Morgan Chase of the world, they're doing some incredible AI workloads on this, right? So they've made a very, very bold statement, and they're going after the mainframe business with this as well, right? They're saying traditionally there were a lot of transactional systems that were high compute needs, and you could not really synchronize them on the cloud and whatnot. If you look at a series of announcements, they're doing a really good game plan on how do we go attack workloads that haven't moved to private clouds or secure clouds yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. I remember when it came out a few years ago that Netflix was running most of its infrastructure on AWS, and being like the amount of video they're moving through that system is like just, crazy to imagine. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. Well, I'm going to move us on to our next topic of the day. There was a great blog post that came out from a security team called Gnostic, that's spelled with a K, on a new class of LLM attacks that they call flow breaking. And what was kind of interesting is that they kind of are proposing this as kind of a new sort of third kind of attack we're seeing in the space, with the other two being prompt injection and jailbreaking. And specifically what flow breaking kind of focuses on is the fact that many of these AI applications are built as really kind of ensembles of models that are doing lots and lots of different things. And in many cases, there are separate models, separate filters that are implemented to block unsafe generations on the part of the model. So, the model might go to advise you that you do something dangerous, and there's another system that says, oh, that's not actually what we should do. pauses the generation and then regenerates it in a more safe way. And what a lot of flow breaking is focusing on is how do we kind of use that as a way of getting unsafe material out of the model, because there is this kind of gap between the model itself and the kind of safety measures that are put in. And Wagner, I know you were the one who kind of flagged this for us. If you want to talk a little bit about like, how does this kind of change our thinking about security on models, and does it make it things more complicated for us, right? As we kind of think about how do we secure these models against manipulation?
I think that it is interesting because it tells us how people are building architectures of models and how they are placing the guardrails. And if we look back on software engineering, it's another way of exploring race conditions, right? And also we can think about asynchronous requests and how all of this is happening. And with this new attack, they're basically exploring this interval, this millisecond interval between generating and the guardrail taking over, and showing that if the content it was sent, then this can be harmful. I think that is the key point. And I try to replicate, and I was able to replicate one of the two attacks that the team showed. And it is... one was not working anymore, at least on ChatGPT 4.0 that I tried, but the other
they
one
plugged that
was,
really real fast.
yeah, but it's interesting in the sense that the data is sent, right? So I think that is important for us to rethink the way that we structure and we place these guardrails in our architectures, and also even organizing the requests. If there are two asynchronous requests, then probably the data will be sent to the user. I think that is the key aspect, and the content may be harmful and someone may use that. So I think that is the key aspect. I think that they showed, and even that for the human, for the common user, this will not show because it is so fast that it's hard to see the content, but the content is there. I think that is the key point.
Yeah, and I think it's really fun. And Wagner, like you're saying, I think because it reveals so much about how these systems are architected. I mean, Aaron, if I can kick a question over to you, it's like, why are these companies streaming the unsafe tokens at all, right? Like, doesn't it make more sense to have an architecture where you do the safety checks before the tokens get to the user? Like, why is it that we have this kind of like millisecond gap where you can kind of get this unsafe stuff out, from the point of view of the user?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it appears as though, we're always looking to be faster and faster and faster, right? And sometimes we concede to speed of response over responsibility, right? And because of that, we're willing to take extra risk, right? But you have to look at the opportunity cost. And I think with this study it's fairly well done, with this flow breaking, where this type of, I call it agentic social engineering, right? Where you're basically trying to get agents to do something that they're not supposed to do, or you're changing the order of operations. You're getting one agent to talk to another agent and skip over somebody else or something else where it shouldn't, right? And so there needs to be almost like this auditing, where you have these breadcrumbs of which agent has communicated with another agent so that they can't skip another, right? And then the last point that I just wanted to make too was, with broadcast TV, whenever you're watching a live game, it's never, I always say it's never real time. There's always like a 5-second delay, right? Because there's time for somebody to take out vulgarities, or if someone runs onto a football field and does something a little odd, right? We can edit it out. So perhaps we need to start thinking about, these types where it's never exactly real time, but there's always this gap and delay so that, we can ensure the safety of the audience before they see the content. But to recap that, I just think we need to be careful about conceding to speed over responsibility.
I have a question for Aaron. There's a lot of techniques that we are now deploying with clients, like prompt caching. AWS has released their automatic reasoning that was working great for the last 5 years with ML models. Now they're bringing it to LLMs. Do you feel that having more of these checks and balances, like caching and things of that nature as well, do you think that we have a better opportunity today than we did 6 months back to go solve and catch for these bad behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, great ideas. I think we do, because we certainly have more data to understand the problem, right? And then some additional tools at our disposal in our toolbox, to attack, these types of flow breaking pieces, right? And through caching, there's a lot that you can do, with caching, because you can sort of create these hashes to know where the data has already been, and then you can recycle that data, right, such that it's faster, and therefore, you don't have that extra milliseconds, like Wagner mentioned, to inject, some sort of attack, right? So, so it just accelerates, right? The speed of which we can these LLMs and agentic systems could respond.
So, Aaron, I see when we're doing these deployments for clients at scale in production, I feel that RAGs as a community, we have spent so much energy in improving RAGs to be more enterprise ready. I feel that agents today are where RAG was 18 months back. They used to make amazing, nice demos on stage. Great startups can go work with it. But when you get to enterprise, RAGs took 18 months to come up with like 21 different methods of doing RAGs and whatnot, right? So I think that agents, there's a little bit more security risk at this point. For RAGs, we've done a fairly decent job of access control and things of that nature, all kinds of hallucination detections. I'm really hoping that the community will push agents and better frameworks quite a bit in 2025.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the interesting question I was going to ask you, Shobit, is like, I think what Aaron's proposing is that, particularly for agents right now, there's a little bit of like a speed and safety trade-off. And, I guess kind of what you're saying for RAG is like, there's reason for optimism, right? At some point, we might be able to both be fast and safe. Do you think that's true? Like, do you think in agents right now, there is kind of this trade-off just because like we don't still really know how to ensure safety in them?
Yes, I think auditability and we're doing this for a very large client right now where we are creating multiple agents. They'll talk to each other in production and whatnot, right? When we attempt to even start getting legal approvals as we go release them state by state, there's so many questions that are unanswered in the agentic frameworks today. It is not deterministic, so we need to be very careful that two different people are not getting two completely different answers. With all those checks and balances for bias, output, things of that nature, we need better guardrails, better examples of how to go call this API every time, and so on and so forth. So I think just like we did with large language models, we'll move towards much, much smaller models over time, and hence smaller agents. So you'll start to build a set of agents that have been certified that they do this particular job incredibly well. So just like we started to create a farm of RPA bots, and each one did one task really well, I believe that we'll get to a marketplace where we will have agents that have been pre-trained, and some agents do an incredible amount of work really, really well. And I think we'll get to a point just like we do at Fiverr, or if you're going and getting some services online, and you'll see that people will start rating these agents well, and you'll have some of the leaderboards and stuff. Say, hey, if I want to go book a flight, if I want to find the cheapest flight from A to B, I want to use this agent, I'm going to pay 20 cents for it and get that done. So I think we'll get to a world inside of enterprises, curated, secure, as well as external commercial, where these agents will start to compete and do work really, really well, but they'll do one small task really well. The meta orchestration is where the enterprise will invest a lot. There, I think the security will start to get addressed better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Aaron, I want to go back to just a little bit moment ago. You used this very tantalizing phrase, which is agentic social engineering. That's really an intriguing idea. And I guess if you go into that a little bit more, I mean, is that literally what you're thinking about? Is like, well, we have social engineering and security, which is, I call and I convince, the boss to give me the password to get into a system. You think that actually is kind of like how we should think about agentic security, which is now we're not even talking about humans anymore, but kind of the manipulation of agents for, not so good ends?
Yeah, I mean, if I put a focus in on, this particular flow breaking, it seems like the authors came up with 4 different types of vulnerabilities. So there's forbidden information, streaming window, order of operations, if you could skip, agents talking to others, and then software exploitation. So if a component gets too busy, then it becomes overwhelmed and it affects other components of the system. And so those 4 different vulnerabilities, I think the way that I have a mental model, could go over towards this agentic social engineering, where you get these agentic pieces to do something that they maybe shouldn't do, or to change the order of operations, to exploit software, to inject data, right, or a prompt into a streaming window, right? So, and And I think, the Turing test 1.0 and 2.0, where we're trying to get these LLMs, to behave and act and rationalize like humans, it's almost like we can social engineer them because they almost have this, their own mindset, almost like a theory of mind where they can begin. It's not there. I mean, we have a ways to go, but where one LLM can maybe understand, hey, this other LLM has its own mindset, its own beliefs, right? And you can try to train some of that through meta prompting, but that's the way that I'm beginning to start to think about some of these problems.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure we get Wagner in here. I mean, because Wagner, you kind of think a lot about, model security and safety and like how do we ensure these models are kind of responsibly deployed? And it feels like this is like a really interesting interface, right? It's like we have all these methods that we use for thinking about how we manipulate humans, right, as a security problem. And maybe we can kind of import that to these kind of AI systems now.
I bet that there are people thinking about this right now, for the good and for the bad, right? The term that Aaron used also intrigued me, and I think it is interesting. And I started thinking that the flow breaking attack is only possible because the architecture that he created is based on human perception, right? If you think about agents, the first response would be caught by an agent, and that will be a problem already, right? So if there are agents consuming these endpoints the way that they are architected right now, these agents can consume that information, right? So I think that is the first thing that came to my mind, right? If there are architectures based on human perception, agents don't have this limitation about this millisecond that the information appears and is deleted. So the agents will consume that information, and what else, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you need a social contract. Who can or which LLMs can talk to which LLMs? Almost like a communication graph. So you can trace. So almost creating social cliques, right? And in a sense, but it's
Right.
it's
Like,
just really
your
interesting.
agent starts hanging out with like the bad kids. It goes wrong, So.
So, and Aaron, that boils down to the kind of architecture we end up using with multi-agent frameworks, right? They're depending on the problem we're trying to solve for our enterprise clients. In certain clients, we will go create a series of small agents, one after the other is more sequential in nature. In certain clients, there's a different framework for having a meta agent at the top, and everybody else is kind of serving the tasks assigned to them, and everybody essentially sends the responses back. Then there are certain clients we're working with where we create a network of agents that can all talk to each other. And in certain cases, if there's a tie, we could do voting to go do a tiebreaker. So this is just depending on the different kind of architectures. And the social engineering part will get more and more interesting in this space, right? You may have in our organizations, we have a legal team, we have an AI ethics committee, and so on and so forth, right? That we'll escalate to, like, hey, you guys tell us how to do this well, right? So I think we'll start to replicate how human organizations work inside of these agentic multi-agent frameworks, right? So I think there will be a good cop, bad cop kind of situation. There will be somebody who interprets the word of law and say, hey, my interpretation of this legal contract is X. And everybody has to abide by that, right?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating because it's, famously like Conway's law, right? Is like you ship your organization chart, and it's kind of like this will play out here. They'll just be like the lawyer agent in the app, that's like reviewing everything. So I'm going to move us on to our next topic. There was a really interesting story that popped up earlier in the week. Some users on social media noticed that there are certain names, David Mayer being one of them and Jonathan Zittrain being another, and people identified a few others, that are names that are systematically refused by OpenAI to talk about. So you'll say, hey, do you know anything about David Mayer? And OpenAI would just like not engage at all. This is kind of mysterious. People did some investigations. As far as we can tell, per Ars Technica, this might be the result of an additional filter that OpenAI implements to deal with things like defamation claims. So this would be a case where someone comes to OpenAI and says, hey, OpenAI is saying all sorts of lies about me. I don't want OpenAI to talk about me at all. Take my name out of your system. And I think this is really fascinating because it kind of reveals like how these systems are being administered on the back end. And I think raises some really interesting questions, right? Because I think that if in the future stuff like ChatGPT is like the source of truth, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to meet Wagner for the first time. What do you know about Wagner Santana, right? Like your ability to kind of like pull information out of this system, could be used for ill and could be used for good as well. I can imagine situations where you do want that privacy. And I guess maybe Wagner, I already name checked you, so maybe I'll just throw the question to you. Is like, how do you think companies should navigate the ethics of this? This is like a really hard problem, right? Is like someone comes to you saying, "I don't want ChatGPT to talk about me, rather." Is ChatGPT supposed to just say, "Okay, fine, we're going to just take you out of the system," or is there kind of an obligation for these models to be able to talk about everybody? I'm curious about what you think.
Yeah, it's interesting that now we're experiencing how legislation is impacting this kind of system, right? Because this has the flavor, the smell of something, or probably someone with moving a case saying exactly that. Okay, I don't want this technology saying this, and that about me. But at the same time, there are people that have the same name that cannot be recognized by this technology, and they may want that. And it's interesting that when I got the list of names, I of course tried to replicate, and I even tried to combine the flow breaking with the list of names.
I'm detecting a trend here where you read something and then you just try to go replicate it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wagner, go ahead.
No worries. And then it has this smell like, okay, this has to do with someone or some organization moved an action against the company, and then you cannot talk about that anymore. And also, if you think about rights that people have with certain laws, we have the right to be forgotten, right? If we may request a company that has our data to not, or to delete, or to not provide that data, right? And it depends on country or region, but yeah, for depending on the legislation where you are, you may have this right. So again, now we go back to the discussion we had before, like in terms of architecture, and probably the way that these models were trained, they were not prepared for that, right? And what we're seeing is the result of hard-coded rules, right? And that are excluding not the one person that it should, but everybody with the same name or with a similar name, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that happens, I think, because of this very specific situation where you spend so much money and time and resources to pre-train this model. And then you're like, oh man, we have to fix all these things. And it's like very hard for us to run that, training process again. So we're kind of forced to build all of these things that we kind of bolt on to sort of like patch up the holes in what we discover. I guess, Shobit, do you have a view on this? Like, do you think, like, I mean, I know in the past you've been very pro, AI is good for all sorts of things. And like, I can imagine someone like you saying like, no, people shouldn't have the right to just like write OpenAI a letter and have their name taken out of the system. I don't know, maybe I'm just putting you in a box, but.
Fair. Like, I think if you have a consolidation of one or two mega techs that are controlling information flow, if you have a few people who have the authority to go censor stuff, that is very dangerous, right? You don't want to be in a society where a few small people who fire their AI ethics board and they are controlling what is allowed and what not, right? But I do think that over time you will have a split in the way the responses come to you, depending. And if you try to see what we're doing in the media space, right? By definition, your self-reflecting bias towards how you consume information and what your beliefs are, you will either on a spectrum of CNN and Fox, you'll have one of the other spectrums, right? So over time, you've figured out that most of the media, the way I want to consume, these are the certain agencies or media outlets that reflect my values or talk about the stuff that I'm interested in. And you get to there by looking at the click stream of what I've spent more time, what I've forwarded more, and so on and so forth, right? So I do believe you'll come to a point where you would have ChatGPTs of the world having more personalized flavors of things that they remember that you've asked in the past, right? So I think over time, you'll get to a point where there's some central authority that is making some broad recommendations around what happens to policies. But then there's this personalized set of policies. I can go and block stuff on Twitter and say, don't show me this again, this is irrelevant and stuff, right? It'll start becoming personalized to me. So I think we'll get to a point where there's a good combination of Shobit's responses that I get from ChatGPT may be very different from what Aaron is getting when he asks the same question, because ChatGPT now knows so much about our preferences and is tailoring the answers to us. Aaron, do you think so?
Yeah, I do. I think that those are really good points. I wanted to just mention too that part of my day job, is running live events. So within the sports entertainment, we do U.S. Open, for example, ESPN, fantasy football, and so on. But during these live events, as Shobit and Wagner were pointing out, sometimes we need to fix a problem right then and there, right? We don't have time to diagnose what it is and to give a prognosis of it. And so that's where we use, similar techniques of a block list, right? So a funny story in, 30 seconds is there's a tennis player that has a last name of Sock. We found that it was generating content about socks and pants and shirts, nothing to do about tennis, right? And so we're like, wait a second, how is that happening? And so we had to quickly put in I won't call it a block, but a filter, right? To filter out data that had to do about clothing, right? Because it was just very ambiguous. And so just these quick stop gaps, right? Until we have time to fix an issue, right? That could be detrimental to maybe society. I think it's important. But on the other hand, when we do that, when we also have to be transparent about what we are blocking, what we are changing. And there's many places in these large agentic systems to have these kind of, I call them filters or blocks, right? To do different types of functions. But yeah, and then one last point that Wagner made was being able to delete data. So the field of machine unlearning, I think, is very important. It's a very deep field. There's work going on, right now. I mean, it's moving quick, but there's different techniques, right, where you could train model across stratified data. So if you need to remove some type of data, you just simply remove that model because that data is embedded in there. But if you have one massive big model, it's very difficult to remove it. Right. So there's different ways of handling this. And I just think in terms of, as these new techniques come online, it just becomes easier, but there's always side effects with them to do it. But just my word of caution is let's just be careful that we're not censoring, data in unintended ways, but we're being transparent about how we're creating these stop gaps.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one thing that's kind of unique about this story is that no one knows why, right? Like, people just find out that like you can't talk about people. And, I think one improvement going forwards, Aaron, to your point is, we should at least have some kind of message, right? That says like, why is it that we can't see this? Otherwise, I think we're left to do what, Wagner's doing, which is we try to replicate and then we try to speculate. And, I think that's maybe not the best situation for the ecosystem. Well, as always, more to talk about than we have time to cover in MOE. And so Aaron, Wagner, Shobit, thanks for joining us. And thanks for joining us, all you listeners. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we will see you next week on Mixture of Experts.